In the most important DPP game of the year thus far, the SPL Finals, both players led off with Breloom. Now, if you know anything about DPP or the DPP Lead Metagame, or at least you did before this year, and you took some time off and you came back and you saw this, you'd be like, wow, that's weird. For such a must-win game for both players to bring Scarf Breloom lead, that's really unusual. I wonder what's going on there. Well, what's unusual about this is multifaceted. First of all, it's not unusual for Breloom lead to be seen now regularly. Second of all, neither of these Brelooms are scarfed. I made a video recently about the evolution of DPP Breloom, and in it, it was discussed how Scarf Breloom used to be a kind of offbeat lead. It's made a bit of a resurgence in recent years because fast sleep is good, and it's a good revenge killer, stuff like that. But nowadays, it's all about the sash leads, and they have proven themselves to be really consistent and really reliable. So the DPP lead metagame has gone through many changes in its time. And what's really interesting about it is that DPP used to be almost synonymous with having a lead metagame. You know, it was one of its most defining features. And then over the years, it has kind of changed to the point where previously you would have people pouring in oceans of effort to have the advantage on turn one. It was considered so important. And then it kind of went in another direction, which we will explore today, of course. And it, I think, was influenced by the fact that Advance came back to Smoke and Tor, and DPP players were starting to play Advance more. And in Advance, at that time, there was not that much emphasis placed on getting a good lead matchup, because the idea is that, you know, whatever your opponent is going to threaten you with on the first turn, you are probably going to be able to, if you have a good team, you should be able to answer it. No probably about it. And DPP was kind of influenced like that. You went from a metagame very strongly characterized by dedicated leads to taking a more advanced-like approach of, you know what, I'm just going to put together a good team, not worry about the lead matchup, but then figure the lead out later, you know, and I'll adapt. Now, what's funny about that is, number one, obviously it's not the same thing, because the power of Stealth Rock is where the DPP lead metagame comes from, so the dynamics are different. But what's really amusing is that in recent years, Advance has placed greater and greater emphasis on the lead metagame, to the point where I think Advance's lead metagame is now more defined and arguably more important than DPP's, which is really strange to think about. And we'll explore why that is. So, yeah, it's fascinating to think about. Now, remember, it's not as easy as, oh, well, it doesn't matter what I lead off with because, you know, I'll just figure it out. Because a lot of what the lead metagame, or let me put it this way, it's not just a lot. The DPP lead metagame revolves around Stealth Rock, right? And the most defining Stealth Rocker is Azelf. So Azelf is synonymous with get those rocks up, prevent the opponents with taunt, blow up for big damage and early momentum into a cascading chain of setup sweepers to bowl your opponent over with. You know, okay, great, that's awesome. So with that fast-paced playstyle in mind, everything else kind of comes out of that and grows out of that. So whether you are trying to use Azelf yourself, or beat Azelf at its own game with Aerodactyl, or punish the dedication to getting a Pokemon, to sacrificing a Pokemon just for rocks with an attacking lead that, you know, brings it down to a theoretical sash that was its original set, and also then priority to finish it off because Azelf is fast, or, you know, Scarf Sleep. Or, you know, you run a stall team and you aren't as dedicated to the fast-paced rocks approach and you have to take a different route. Whatever it winds up being, you know, it all grows out of that Azelf-centric idea. Even if Azelf is not always the best or most dominant lead, whatever, it is the foundation for everything. And funnily enough, I was going to say, in terms of the advanced lead metagame, I made a video on that recently, but a longer time ago, I also made a video on the evolution of lead Azelf, which you should check out if you want more details there. So, here's where I'm going to start making the case for how the lead metagame has evolved. So here we have the lead usage stats from the most recent SPL. And next to them we have the lead usage stats from Jirachi's DPP Invitational Tournament. So you show these to a DPP player of whatever period of time ago. I mean, Skarmory #1 in Jirachi's tournament is absolutely obscene. And what's really fascinating about it is that I don't even think anyone would say, oh yeah, Skarmory is one of the most defining leads, or one of the best leads. You know, it's a good lead for sure. It has, whether you're running a more offensive or defensive team with it, but #1 in usage, you know, it's not that excellent. It's not that defining. And, I mean, Azelf #2, sure. And then in SPL, you see something that Jirachi #1 in usage? Really? I mean, sure, Jirachi's a good lead, but, you know, #1? What's it doing? And then Azelf is #3, which is fine, but Zapdos eclipsing it in #2, and depending on how far you go back, then Zapdos lead might also be considered, you know, something new, not really an established part of the metagame either. So, but that's really going back. So what's interesting to me about looking at these usage stats and just observing the metagame and how teams are built, it is definitely in that stage, and this can fluctuate, but it's definitely in that stage of not placing such intense emphasis on the lead matchup. I remember there was a Smoke and Tour period where it was like, dude, I'll lead off with my Spadef Heatran or my Choice Band Infernape, because those are two real examples, by the way, because I don't really have a good traditional lead, and this might make the opponent think I'm running a different kind of team on the first turn, but whatever, I'll kind of figure it out. Just because the team is so good otherwise, and I don't want to ruin it by slotting in a dedicated lead. You know, that kind of was the norm, and I would say it's still the norm today. Not with those two sets in particular, but the whole idea of if you have a good team, you know, don't ruin it just because you're trying to get the matchup or the advantage on turn 1. And then there was another period where people remembered, oh, Machamp is insane, and then people realized, oh, Machamp, Metagross, whatever the lead is, Azelf. The general idea that I think has brought it back from that brief focus on the lead slot again, where people were, you know, putting, it used to be that you would want the advantage on turn 1 and then pair something with your lead to ensure that you would take on the stuff your lead lost to. So the two most common ones I remember are lead Machamp plus Stealth Rock Heatran, and lead lead Life Orb Starmie plus Lumberry Metagross. Those are two classic examples, and they would take on pretty much anything you were going to throw at them that was common at the time. So you either got the good matchup on turn 1, or on turn 2 you flipped the matchup, you know? And that kind of idea, well, not just the covering the leads that your lead doesn't handle, because whatever your opponent's leading with, then you're going to want some sort of answer to it, right? In broad terms anyway. But you see how that good lead matchup can quickly be turned around. Like, let's say you have a lead Machamp against a lead Life Orb Starmie. So you pay back the Starmie, right? And then they pivot to their Lumberry Metagross, and suddenly your Machamp is in a losing matchup. So just because you got the advantage on turn 1 didn't necessarily make any sort of material progress. You know, a little bit of chip on Metagross, but you get the idea. So I think that idea has also been very prominent, that general concept, because a lot of the periods of the metagame being more lead-centric have, again, centered around Azelf. Because if it's not, you know, Machamp or Metagross, you know, ripping through entire teams, then you will have instances of Azelf hyper offense just dominating. You know, when the metagame is populated by lots of slow, bulky teams, and Azelf just wrests momentum from them on the first turn. And I should probably get a replay with Azelf as opposed to 2 Zapdos leads. But hey, that's I don't think this game had an Azelf lead, if I recall. 2 Jirachis. So we're seeing those the number 1 and number 2 leads there. I don't think this one did either, but yeah, there's another Zapdos, there's a Hippo. I mean, well, actually no, that's not a great example, so let me hold that thought. And where are the Azelfs? My goodness. These two run offense quite a lot. Etran, Metagross, no. I mean, you're getting a pretty good idea through these replays of the lead metagame landscape. You know, just the things you're generally seeing by skimming through these. So this will lay the groundwork. But I mean, this replay is actually quite a good example because Suicune and Gyarados are both examples of, you know, more modern leads, especially Suicune. And we're going to go through that history of how it came to this point after we get to that Azelf running everything over example that has led to this decreased emphasis on leads. Oh, I just clicked on the same replay. Whoops. But yeah, I have not lost my point. I am doing that very pointedly. Jirachi, Empoleon. Well, I always do love to see an Empoleon lead, but that's one of my personal favorites. Has been for 14 years. Another Scar. Oh yeah, I remember that. And you can enjoy the awesome Pokemon Mystery Dungeon remix by Zame playing in the background. Another Suicune lead, my god. Fortress lead, now that is a relic that you don't really see nowadays, and I think for good reason. Fortress is kind of bad. I mean, yeah, it has its uses, but not the point. Anyway, I apologize for not having this Azelf thing ready. Latias, but yeah, here's another example. Latias and Flygon, also very, very modern in terms of what the lead metagame has come to. Because if you went back 14 years to current gen DPP and threw these two as your leads, people would look at you like, what are you doing? You know, those aren't good leads at all. Because of that greater focus on, you know, Stealth Rock or punishing the Stealth Rock. And that's all about the Azelf. So, how's it taking this long? Okay, I was going to say, how long is it taking to get to an Azelf lead? So, anyway. Yeah, so Azelf would have these periods where it would do its standard Azelf thing, rocks, taunt, boom against something slower, and you would, as the slower defensive team, really struggle to get something going against it in return because, you know, it's stopping your Stealth Rock and it's pressuring you and putting the boom on, and then you, as the more bulky team, are not exerting any sort of real pressure outside of maybe Sandstorm into the chain of DDers that are overwhelming you. So there were several periods of these Azelf hyper offense teams, bowling over the metagame. Not even necessarily Dragon Dance, by the way. There's plenty of Azelf offense that, you know, ran just one Dragon Dance or hardly DD spam, or none at all. Anyway, the point being that Azelf would lay the groundwork for you to pressure the opposition, and it would potentially give you the tools to just bowl them over right away. However, even when the metagame adapts against Azelf, it is still going to give you if you build the team well, it is going to give you the tools to succeed in much the same way if you execute it well. Think of it like Deoxys speed in DPP Ubers, where no matter how anti-Dio speed the entire metagame is, it's still good, right? But you have to be a little more conscientious of how you use it if you want to really get something out of it and not just, you know, the bare minimum, i.e. hazards. Anyway, so what would happen is all this hinges on Azelf getting that advantage right from turn 0, right? So what a lot of developments in the metagame were using these Pokemon or these sets on these Pokemon that would not be as phased by Azelf getting uncontested rocks early on. Wish Protect Jirachi, the rise of that. That's a Pokemon that doesn't really care if you have those early rocks. As opposed to other or older stall teams, which would not use it, instead use things that were more rocks vulnerable, and would really hinge on Fortress or even Starmie, as the metagame evolved, getting that spin-off to be able to function at complete defensive capacity. And this whole anti-hazards thing has evolved into, full-out Superman teams just being all-out, ignoring of the hazards that you could stack every hazard in the game and they wouldn't really care. But it's not quite the same as, it's not just about not being overwhelmed by Stealth Rock. It's not being overwhelmed by Stealth Rock in conjunction with the sweepers being thrown at them, because there are also plenty of balance teams that aren't Stealth Rock weak per se. They're not super reliant on the spin, but they just don't have the defensive tools to withstand such a barrage. So instead, you get these balance teams, these Wish Protect, Jirachi, Hippo, or other bulky ground. Even when you think Breloom and Clefable, which are typically Pokemon thought of as DD food, they can actually do quite a good job against these teams, especially in conjunction with your Jirachi, Gliscor, Hippo, Pert, whatever. So you have these defensive teams rising in response to the Azelf spam of it all, and their goal is to kind of slow the game down, because these hyper offense Azelf shenanigans, they really hinge on non-stop screaming momentum from the first turn. And as soon as you slow them down, as soon as you stop the snowball from rolling over you, which is easier said than done, of course, sometimes. But if you can do that, if you can just reverse or not even reverse the momentum, just bring it to a standstill, then they are not, dead in the water, but it is much, much, much more difficult for them, because they operate at a pace which is just constantly overwhelming the opponent. So once you have kind of healed off some damage and, withstood an assault from a sweeper, whatever it is, then you can do that thing where you are now much more able to take on the rest of them, because you are not you're not being bombarded by everything simultaneously. What it feels like, you can just slow things down sufficiently to the point where you are more able to isolate the big threats, because you're not sacrificing walls just to bring them down. If you can have a wall, stand in the way and, not have, and prevent that Pokemon from getting a KO, then that's enormous. Because remember, they're playing 5-6 down just for those rocks and that momentum. So the reason why they do that is because, yes, it often is worth it to sacrifice that thing so you can get Gara in without it taking rocks, and with rocks up to pressure things like Zapdos. And, that's because Gara will regularly take, a Pokemon and a half, 2 Pokemon with it going down. Before going down, I should say. So if you can stop it from doing that, that's the fulcrum of their entire strategy, is just, no longer sufficient. So, yeah. And in this game, you see a great example, if you are paying attention to the screen, because Mishimono has an Azelf team with it might be 2 DDers. I don't know if that T-Tar is DD taunt or not. It could be, might not be, but it's 2 DDers max, possibly 1. And, the Agility Metagross, but, Agility Metagross isn't overwhelming defensive teams with its attack boosting as well, and it's got a Scarf Latias, which, yeah, it's a great cleanup Pokemon, but it's, half for the Healing Wish. So this is an example of a non-super standard Azelf team, or non-super standard, it's an Azelf offense team without, overt focus on the D-Deers, without the holy trinity of Gara, D-Knight, and T-Tar. Kingdra does not count, by the way. Anyway, and you could even extend it to physical boosting in general, because those DD spam teams, even when they're not boosting with DD, they're often boosting their physical attacks with things like SD Scizor or Lucario, sometimes even SD Gliscor if you pair it with Iron Ball Metagross to trick Skarmories and Rotoms and things like that. So, yeah. And on the other hand, it's actually perfect because you get an example of the kind of balanced team that aims to do exactly what the metagame has evolved to do in order to stifle common Azelf strategies. With the Wish Protect Jirachi, with the Skarmory, with this great defensive core, you get that first turn advantage. Okay, big deal. You are not going to be able to ride it automatically to a win against this style of team. And as I said, also, the tools are still very, very much there. It's just that you have to really, really execute them once that first round of attacks, kind of fizzles out. And that's why I like Mishimono's team. The Healing Wish gives you a second life. You get a lot of mileage out of Infernape that way. Very nicely done. Anyway, so that is that concept, basically. So now let's look again at the usage stats, because I would like to highlight. Remember how we said earlier we would go through that whole history of what the lead metagame used to be? Okay, so you've got your old leads. We'll just call them the current gen leads. Azelf, of course, Aerodactyl, the faster Azelf, and there are other Sash Rocks leads too. Fake Out Infernape, that was quite popular. Smeargle, now completely non-existent pretty much, but it also doubled as a Spiker, of course. And another Sash lead, Roserade, not setting up rocks, but toxic spikes. And there was another Sash lead too, an Empoleon, although it commonly ran Choppleberry. By the way, if you're looking for something stimulating on the screen, contrast what I'm saying here with the usage stats you see. Because it is very, very different in terms of, where the metagame was to what it has evolved into. Because this metagame, lead metagame I'm describing, before it was very precise. You could count on facing this dedicated lead, regularly. And nowadays, it's kind of like, well, just lead off with whatever, whatever's kind of best. It's not, being super precise into certain leads. Not to say that doesn't exist, of course. And not to say that lead customization doesn't still very much factor into team building. My God, if you go to that Evolution of Lead Azelf video, then you will see just how much insane customization goes into that kind of thing. The moveset, the item, the bulk, or lack thereof. Whether you even run a rock set and don't just go for Choice Band or something. So yeah, so at this time you got Azelf, Arrow, Roserade, Fake Out Infernape, Empoleon running Sash, or Choppleberry, so you still beat Infernape with Hydro and Aqua Jet. And even if it fakes you out and breaks your Sash, because then close combat won't finish you off. Anyway, and Empoleon is also an example of not just a Sash Hazard lead, because it could run rocks and often usually did during current gen anyway, but also an attacking lead. And kind of evolved into a more all-out attacking lead, dropping Stealth Rock, because you don't want to be put in those positions where it's like, well, do I want to take this KO in the first turn, or do I want to get up rocks? Because both situations are ugly. When you get into a 1v1 against like a Dragonite lead or something, you want to take that KO, but you also want to get up rocks, and you don't want to not have up rocks. So, you could do things. You could run 2 Stealth Rockers, or more commonly just run an all-out attacking Empoleon. But yeah, at the time, Empoleon was also a hazard lead, but it was also an attacking lead. This is why it was so great. It had such a great matchup as an attacking lead too. And these other attacking leads were also punishing the opponent. You've noticed how most of these Sash users are very fast and frail. So the attacking leads would be slower, but you would hit them hard, and then you would have priority to finish them off. Sometimes you would run Lumberry for Roserade. But yeah, Empoleon was such an example. Metagross was a more famous example, or the most famous example of this, because it was also a Stealth Rocker, but it was a bulky Stealth Rocker. It doesn't need Sash. Nowadays, Metagross commonly runs Sash because, it doesn't need Lum, you want to run Sash to survive things like Specs, Heatran, Overheat. So, and with that in mind, then, you're not going to do that without Sash. And that also results in Metagross being a lot faster. And Metagross has also had that same evolution that Empoleon has. The whole thing where, well, I want to KO the opponent, but I also want my rocks. So it wound up being more efficient to just shift rocks to something else. But during current gen, Metagross was regularly seen, whether it was running Lumberry or Akaberry, was regularly seen with rocks and the intent to Meteor Mash and Bullet Punch Azelf and Arrow and Roserade into Oblivion. So it was a bulky Stealth Rock lead and an attacking lead simultaneously. Another attacking lead, the most famous of all was Machamp. Before Machamp popped up at the beginning of Heart Gold and Soul Silver, you had Dragonite, and this is why Dragonite was being used for a long time, even when Salamence was still in the tier, because with E-Speed, Mence can't replicate that lead position. Plus, you get to run D-Knight and Mence on the same team justifiably, which is awesome. But with that, then D-Knight also became another example. You hit the Sash lead hard, you finish it off. Or if you face a bulky stealth rocking lead like Metagross or Swampert, then you can threaten it. Roscoe, my buddy Roscoe, used to call D-Knight choice or decision because, you have a Swampert lead against D-Knight, you got to make a choice. You're either getting up rocks or you're ice beaming the D-Knight, but you're not getting both. And both of them are pretty nasty. So, yeah, D-Knight, it was excellent for that reason. D-Knight also eventually wound up running Outrage with Choice Band over the standard mix set just to O-code the lead Machamp that absolutely terrorized the metagame. And Machamp also began running Max Speed Sash in response to the CB D-Knight and the CB Azelf with Zen Headbutt and the Specs Heatran with Overheat. And the other things like the Spec Zapdos with HP Flying that popped up to counter it. But yeah, so then you had that. You had Heatran as a good lead with Shuka Berry because you countered Metagross lead. You could stay in against Azelf and Roserade. Pop up rocks early. Some people even ran Scarf Rocks Heatran, but that didn't last. Shuka wound up being the standard. And then over time, like we said, Specs, then Life Orb because it also O-code Metagross through its Aqua Berry, which is why Metagross, now more commonly runs Sash. And you also have Specs or Life Orb or Custap Goten Tran. It was this set that ran max HP, I think it was like 80 defense, so you would actually live Machamp Dynamic Punch plus Bullet Punch, and with Magma Storm you would 2-hit KO it because you can't miss thanks to no guard, and you don't even let it switch out. And with this Lum and Magma strategy, you also are a Heatran set that completely dominates lead Roserade since you wake up from the Lum from the Sleep Powder with Lum, and you Magma Storm it down to the Sash, and then Magma finishes it off, unlike Fire Blast. Barring a lucky burn, of course. So yeah, that was an example. And then it wound up being, I mentioned Spadef Tran earlier. If you had a Pasho Tran, you could lead with that. Custap Tran, whatever. But that was later on. During current gen, it was mostly just, Shuka or Specs, and then Life Orb as the generation drew to a close. Yeah, so you had that. Swampert was very, very popular during current gen. It was one of the most defining leads, in fact. Azelf, Swampert, Metagross. Yeah, nowadays, where do you even see Swampert lead? We saw one Swampert lead this last SPL. I mean, it's still a fine lead, of course. But, yeah, it's very low in the usage stats. From SPL, we saw one Swampert lead, and how many do we see? Do we see a single Swampert lead in... Oh, we did. Okay, I skipped over it. Okay, yeah, it's 11th in usage, tied with Heatran. That seems about right. But, yeah, it's definitely not as popular. But, again, anomaly, because this is also a tournament with, a lot of games, and Skarmory was the most used lead. I still can't get over that. But, yeah, and then, cousin to Swampert is, of course, Hippowdon on, all-out stall teams. You even saw Gliscor a good chunk. That was quite popular because it's got a lot of nice tools. Stealth Rock, U-Turn, Taunt, it's great. And some people would even, I remember Megan Fox would use... Roostless Gliscor on his team. And yes, Megan Fox was the username of a Smogon player and he had a great team, which was very defining of the semi-stall era of Taunt Scarm and Scarf T-Tar around the time those were becoming popular. And it was called Megan Fox's Hot because, look, it was the late 2000s, okay? So that's, yeah. Anyway, so... Yeah, Megan Fox was like, dude, I don't even need to roost with Gliscor on this team. I can heal it with Wish Call Mine Jirachi, which was also very... representative of the time, but it just plays so fast and fluid. You don't want to give up Taunt, and you love the momentum of U-Turn. So, yeah. So Gliscor was another defining lead, and then occasionally you would have some offbeat stuff like Gallade also popped up as an anti-Machamp choice because it was like Machamp, but it beat Machamp with Zen Headbutt, Stab Zen Headbutt. And it wasn't, weak to Dynamic Punch or Payback or anything in Champ's moveset. Crobat, doing some taunt U-turn stuff, starting the game off fast. Felt very confident, taunting a lot of Azelfs, which is funny, looking back at it. But yeah, something like Tyranitar was not popular at all as a lead. Just looking at, what's used now that wasn't used then. Yeah, so Breloom lead, like Scarf, very, very, very rare. I don't remember seeing in like the last year or so of DPP, Scarf Breloom lead. I mean, that was like left back in the days of like Diamond and Pearl, or like very early Platinum. Or, I don't think it was it was used much at all. Gyarados lead, that did not exist either. Suicune lead, absolutely not. Nidoqueen was used sometimes, but not as a lead. And T-Tar lead was used sometimes. I remember Fear had this Sash T-Tar lead, which was a very good attacker to start off the game, and it was commonly using Dark Pulse because it was meant to be an antidote to dual screens Azelf, because what screen is Azelf going to throw up in front of a T-Tar? Reflect, right? To stop Crunch, so you Dark Pulse it, and then it just drops. And against standard lead Azelf, you just Dark Pulse it down to the Sash, because remember, during current gen, it's all Sash, no like bulked out Colbur or Lum or anything like that. So you down to the Sash, and down it goes. But yeah, there were other T-Tar sets, like bulky Lum T-Tar, as featured on Philip 7086's Team of Torment, was a big deal as well. It has a good matchup spread. You beat Azelf, you beat Heatran. Yeah, but I mean, remember, even during this time, even Zapdos was not a common lead, because note how it doesn't really fit into that whole, it's either a fast Sash lead or an attacking lead with priority, see, because Zapdos doesn't have that, or a bulky lead like Swampert or Hippowdon. Zapdos doesn't really fit into any of those categories. So in the post-DPP landscape, after Black and White came out and continued getting played, it started being used more. It still existed beforehand because Specs HP Flying, that was a current gen invention, and because it just dropped Machamp. And turns out Zap is actually a pretty good lead in general, just because it's bulky, it hits hard, it can really lure in and mess up Heatran. Panamaxis had a team with Zap Plate Zapdos for more flexibility. But yeah, during current gen, it was very, very, very rare. It was pretty much like a good player's secret. So yeah, Suicune, not used. Nidoqueen, not really. T-Tar, not really. Rotom lead, forget it. I can think of one player who used it anywhere close to current gen. A player named Enzo, who was very creative, insanely so. Used an offensive Rotom Wash lead in a test against me in early 2011. That's pretty much it. Celebi lead. Celebi actually was a real lead during current gen with like Akaberry or Sash, very offensive sets. But the reason Celebi is being used as a lead now is because of its unique place on defensive teams. So we're talking bulky Celebi, which again does not measure up to the standards previously set. But I mean, you notice that it works, because it's just a generally good Pokemon, and that's the evolution that the metagame has gone into. Flygon, I remember when this started getting used as a lead. It was never really a star of a lead, but I mean, hey, early Scarf U-turn is not the worst thing in the world, and you can sort out. It will pretty much let you. It's not really going to put you on the back foot too badly if you have good responses to the metagame, which is generally what you aim to achieve with most teams. And some players have even taken advantage of this. Remember, there was a period where Choice banned Flygon. When that was popular, that would often pop up in the lead slot. You just drop a Metagross that thinks it's safe. Beautiful feeling. And sometimes you'll even see mixed Flygon lead. I mean, this is very, very rare, but I like being thorough. Bronzong, I mean, yeah, that could be used, but it was very rare as a lead during current gen. It really more evolved into the in the mid 2010s. It was basically acting like a Metagross, but with the Earthquake immunity. So you could run Lumberry, Bronzong if you wanted. You could run Custap Berry, and what was really nice is that you could even go further and you could run Heat Proof on it. So it would basically be like an Akka Berry Metagross without having to hold Akka Berry. So you could also run Lum or Custap. Of course, standard Levitate was also fine, but yeah. Smeargle, I mean, yeah. Uxie, actually, not super popular, but definitely had its place. Dual Screens Uxie was made very successful by Philip 7086 on his Power Rangers team, which is in the RMT archive on the forums if you want to go digging. It's called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, during the time of both Latias and Salamence, actually. So dual screens, Trick Scarf could make some fun stuff happen as well. That was quite popular on some Skarmory teams. Yeah, and Fortress, because Fori was also quite popular during current gen. So it was pretty much just, it was like Skarmory. You know, in current gen, it was more, hey, let's punish the Metagross leads, let's punish the Skarmory leads. And incidentally, these all being popular was a big reason why Heatran was so nice. It wasn't just the good matchup against Rose, or decent matchup against Rose, because most of them didn't run HP ground, so you could just sit on it and get up your rocks. Good matchup against Azelf, Roserade, Metagross, but also Skarmory and Fortress, and this would give you a solid start against a lot of stall teams. And then you even see Crobat, and yeah, I even had to scroll down here to show Venomoth, which is used because it's as fast as Roserade, and with Shield Dust you can't be, also not a current gen thing, that's a new thing, I think August invented it. But yeah, it's great because you can't be flinched by Jirachi Ironhead, or confused by Machamp D-Punch, which you quad resist anyway. But yeah, and it's as fast, and it has Stab Bug Buzz for Azelf leads, and T-Spikes, and U-Turn, and it's not great, but it's usable. Anyway, so lets you use a grass type more easily. I don't know. Anyway, so some words on these other leads. So Gyarados lead, I believe, was popularized by the French. Sub DD with Lum. This lets you completely turn the tables on a Roserade lead. You DD as it sleeps you, and then you sub on the next sleep, and now you're in business. And with Intimidate and its typing, it naturally stifles Machamp lead. It also can sub on Metagross leads, trying to boom. You have a good matchup against Infernape and Heatran. Yeah, so it's fairly self-explanatory. And then even French Gara, as we called it, even once that fell out of favor, you realize, hey, you can just lead off with Choice Band Gara. I mean, you lead off with this, has happened a couple times. It's such a great threat against stall because you run into a Hippo lead and you can just, make stuff happen. You can start waterfalling, you can predict a switch, whatever. T-Tar lead has become a lot more popular. I remember Earthworm started running, and some other people started running Scarf T-Tar lead just because they wanted the sand and because it dominated Life Orb Starmie lead, which was quite popular as the anti-fire water grass remedy of the post-Dragons era. And you would just drop Azelf immediately, you get sand, it's great. And in more modern times, people even run Stealth Rock Scarf T-Tar to guarantee you get rocks against Azelf. Because, these stall teams, generally their source of speed, or their greatest source of speed is going to be Scarf T-Tar, the only thing they have to outspeed Azelf. There's not many Pokemon faster than Azelf, and certainly not those that are going to fit into your average stall team. So you just pop Stealth Rock on Scarf T-Tar, its moveset is fairly flexible, and then this has also prompted a surge of Arrow usage, actually, because Arrow outspeeds even Scarf T-Tar, but also it has prompted Azelf teams to reconsider, because you can no longer rely on that whole, hey, let me block Stealth Rock from everything thing. Because, it'll get up rocks, and there goes your Gyaro, there goes your D-Knight, so you have to really be considerate of how you're going to approach these things. Whether that's Healing Wish Latias or something else. So, yeah, Scarf T-Tar, but, Sash leads were popular for a time. I really like them. The bulky leads, I mean, T-Tar can do anything. Choice Band was being used for a while. Not because Choice Band T-Tar is a great lead necessarily, but again, it's a good Pokemon, and I like the sand. Plus, you can really punish a Zapdos lead when that was really popular, because that's going to switch or U-turn on you. And with a big pursuit. I mean, but speaking of Zapdos, I mean, even that was running Sub-Toxic Roost as a lead, not because it had a particularly amazing matchup against something, just because it was a good Pokemon. I'm just going to take the more balanced approach. Suicune lead, this one, its first usage was by Malekith in the Smogon Tour 15 finals. Was it 15? No, it was 13. Early 2012. And he used it against Twist of Fate, which was generally seen as a misstep, because the idea was that with Hydro Pump at extreme speed, then it would act as an attacking lead, a la Raikou, who we have not mentioned, which has not been used for some reason in SPL. I mean, I can understand why, but as we see here, from Jirachi's tournament, Raikou was actually fairly popular, 21th in usage, almost as popular as Metagross, Roserade, and Metagross and Roserade. Nice, used as much as Bronzong. But yeah, Raikou is a lead that I've neglected to mention until this point, but we'll get into it after the Suicune thing. But yeah, basically, it's the same idea. I mean, people have even used lead Entei for the same purpose, because you have the big attack and then E-Speed, so it's like a standard attacking lead, right? And the reason Malekith got criticized at the time was because these attacking leads are generally good against offense, because these attacking leads, they'll take out the Sash lead without taking any damage themselves, and then they're generally bulky enough to take most hits, so they will often 2-for-1. That's Machamp and Metagross's forte. Or if it's Dragonite, which is a Pokemon easier to OHKO, then you just switch to something and you still made a lot of progress. Because you haven't, so you switch like your Swampert in the back or your Metagross and you take whatever hit and you get up rocks and now you're in business. So, and in that scenario specifically, the one I just mentioned, then you have taken away that whole idea to get the ball rolling. Rocks, boom, momentum, it's not there anymore. Because you have been so threatening with the attacking lead. So Suicune was meant to function as one of those. And it still could, theoretically. But nowadays, the more modern version of this, of Lead Suicune, is to use it with Protect or Substitute and Calm Mind. You can just pose a threat right away to a lot of stall teams. Like, oh, you want a Stealth Rock T-Tar lead? Okay, I'm going to get 2 free Calm Minds and then bust through your Latias, bust through your Clefable, leave a huge hole. And against offense teams, I mean, you have Sub or Protect to mess with Machamp. You have a good matchup against Heatran. You can Protect on Azelf leads, all sorts of stuff. If they don't taunt you, of course. There's some mind games there. You can Hydro on Rocks or Hydro on Taunt, but it generally is a good Pokemon to lead off with. Because a lot of what Suicune has trouble with is once the passive damage starts rolling, the rocks in the sand, then its survivability is so limited, even though its bulk is so great. So when you throw it in at the beginning of a game, and this is generally applicable to things like Dragonite as well, you start it off at the beginning of a game, and it's going to put in a lot of work because the opponent is not used to having to deal with it at full health, or in a lot of cases before sand is up. So, yeah, this whole boost from the lead slot was not a thing in current gen. But nowadays, and for a long time, it's been, not unusual to see, you're not trying to sweep with this thing, but you're trying to do as much damage as possible. I mean, notice the DD Guerra, the French Guerra, and now the offensive Suicune with Calm Mind in the lead slot. And note the fact that Dragonite used to be mixed. Oh, well, actually now it's Choice Band, and now what's quite common is Dragon Dance. Whether it's Sash or Lum or Yachi Berry, then you're just doing the same thing, trying to cause as much damage as possible. And, whereas the Sash Rocks leads, they want to set up rocks and then momentum. With these, it's like damage first, then get up rocks, and then momentum, because it's easier to ride that rocks plus offensive momentum against a team that's already been damaged. I know I just explained the point clearly. If I didn't, please ask why, if that didn't make sense or something. But I feel the need to explain it in 2 different ways, But yeah, that's the general premise. And on the other side, here we just talked about how there were more attempts to ride that momentum right from the beginning. Well, the opposite is true of the uptick in Rotom leads, because Rotom leads, generally Rest Talk Rotom on stall teams, they are anti-Metagross leads, anti-Zapdos leads. Zapdos. I didn't mean to say Zapdos. I mean, they kind of are, but more importantly, they're anti-Metagross and anti-Azelf. That's what I wanted to say. The Z threw me off. So the reason I mention this is because, remember, those stall teams are trying to not get bowled over by those offensive threats right from the beginning, and Rotom puts a stop because it blanks Explosion. Even a lot of Jirachi sets, a lot of T-Tar sets take a pretty hefty chunk from Boom. Rotom, nothing. So, yeah, and it spreads burns, it's good into Jirachi leads. Oh, and we'll get to those Jirachi leads. But yeah, Rotom is the example of the very opposite concept. So, Jirachi leads. During current gen, Jirachi was most commonly, or pretty much always, a Stealth Rock lead, a Choice Scarf lead. Whether you had Stealth Rock or not, you could trick the Scarf, you could get up rocks right away, But even if you didn't, then you would commonly lead with Scarf Jirachi, because with Scarf Ironhead, you have a 60% chance to deny rocks from Azelf or Arrow, as well as completely ruining Roserade lead. And against a bulky team, not every Scarf Jirachi had trick, but, bulky Swampert, you say, you know what, I'm going to trick that Swampert, I'm going to trick that Hippo. So a lot of utility. Then what became popular in 2010 or so was the Akaberry Stealth Rock set. I believe Panamaxis was responsible for this. And it was Stealth Rock, Psychic, Thunderbolt, HP Ground. If that sounds a lot like Super Jirachi, it is because it is. And Jirachi is such a natural offensive threat, even without trying, so you pretty much just use that great defensive, offensive profile it has, and instead of going for the Calm Mind Sweep later in the game, then you just use it early on to pop up rocks, and then, and with Akaberry, where Super Jirachi more runs lefties or Shuka, then with Aka, and HP Ground, you are 1v1ing Heatran a lot, and you can stay in on things like Infernape a lot better, and you are not fearing Dragonite Fire Blast in the lead slot. So it's just generally good at being fast and hitting hard, taking hits. Lots of great utility. And then around 2016, Bada Bing and some other players exploring stall. But I remember Bada Bing, I want to credit him with it the most. He was leading off with sub-para Jirachi. Not just because it was, specifically meant to counter X lead, but just because it's a Jirachi, it's a good Pokemon. And I remember before that, I was messing around with Wish Protect Jirachi in the lead slot, specifically to deny Azelf lead from doing anything obnoxious. I even ran some physical defense on it to prevent Choice Band Azelf that wanted to blow up on me on the first turn, to prevent it from getting that Oko, which is now a lot more popular. So, whether it's Wish Protect Jirachi or sub offensive Jirachi, it has just generally taken those para-flinch antics. It's not just about the para-flinch, it's just because it's a good threat in general, it counters T-Tar, all that stuff, but it has taken those antics and more or less phased out that the Scarf set and the offensive special attacker, or the Stealth Rock and special attacker, I should say, and it's now mostly just leading off because it's so sturdy against so many Pokemon, and with that rationale, you are going to have a pretty decent, at worst, lead matchup quite often. You're not afraid of Azelf, which is the whole, that's where this whole thing is going, right? So that is where Rachi has gone. So are there any other leads I wanted to... Oh, yes, the rise of Latias lead. This was something I tried when Latias came back, just in the same vein of something like Specs Heatran, just punishing bulky leads. And with Azelf no longer running Sash, it bulks itself out to live all sorts of attacks. I remember my benchmarks for special attacks before: Life Orb, Dragonite, Draco Meteor, and Specs Zapdos T-Bolt. But it's never going to be living something like Specs Heatran Overheat. And Latias was the same rationale with Draco Meteor. And I really like the idea of a bulky Specs Latias that could take on Machamp leads because you bulked it out so much that it would live Payback and Bullet Punch. And this physical defense would also extend to it not being immediately terrified of Tyranitar. You could live in Pursuit, whether you wanted to switch or stay in and barrage it, and that opens up a lot of flexibility. It makes it very, very scary, especially because Latias' speed is already so nice against so much of the mid-range metagame, which is a lot of the metagame. So, yes, Specs Latias has become a standard lead, which I'm very happy about. That's basically it. And even the leads that we see now, there's so much variation. I was going to mention we've seen a couple Scarf Metagross leads to decent effect. People have led with Scarf Infernape before when that was more popular. Frostlass, rip. Poor Frostlass. Bring it back. Frostlass was obviously, an offensive spiker before it was canned. These other leads, these are more gimmicky, like Yanmega. Diamond and Pearl, Hypnosis, it was cool, but now it's just... I should mention Nidoqueen, in that it started being used as a lead because it was good into Machamp lead. And just generally, it fulfilled that same Swampert, Hippo, Gliscor kind of bulky ground role where it just takes hits from things like Heatran well, and that lets you just get up rocks, get up T-Spikes, but then rocks started being used on Nidoqueen less and less, and you would shift it more to the non-lead slot. But what was really nice was I loved pairing it with lead T-Tar, because lead T-Tar countered Azelf and Zapdos and Heatran so well. You get up rocks, blah, blah, blah. Oh, well, what's T-Tar's worst enemy? Lead Machamp, right? Well, you switch Nidoqueen into Machamp. Sand's going. You might have tripped it up with Poison Point right off the bat. So, yeah, it was a really nice way of taking that back. But, yeah, another option I wanted to mention, Aerodactyl sometimes would run, instead of its standard sash, would run Power Herb with Sky Attack, and because also I'm looking at this, and why was Uxie so popular? My God, this is why these stats are so strange. Uxie being more popular than Empo, Hippo, Arrow, Heatran, Swampert, Gara. Yeah, that's kind of nuts. But yeah, the idea being that with Power Herb Sky Attack, then you completely obliterate Machamp leads. This doesn't work so well when they're Sash, but, because Machamp went through this whole period of, oh, nobody's going to status a Lum Machamp, so I can run Sash, and then people started statusing it, so it was back to Lum, and then it was actually, I don't want to run either of these, I want to run Custap Berry because it's amazing, and, oh, I actually want to run Leftovers, so you can run whatever. Sky Attack also has a pretty nasty flinch rate, so there's that. And also, I think you can bulk Arrow out so it doesn't actually get KO'd by anything but Stone Edge, and Stone Edge is not the most popular in Lead Machamp, even though I was a big fan of it when Zapdos and Gyaro were more popular, because you take these Pokemon that naturally match up well against it and you actually smack them quite hard, especially on Sash. You take that Specs HP Flying and you Stone Edge it back real hard. Anyway, so yeah, Sky Attack Arrow. You know who invented this, by the way? My buddy, EmuMan1490, back in the Wi-Fi days. And speaking of inventions made by the Wi-Fi community, in that summer of 2010, where it's also an anti-Machamp invention. But yeah, whereas EmuMan was Walrus Cove, he might be more known by the Smogon name, when he was inventing Sky Attack Arrow, then Cool Trainer Alex, one of our very best, he invented Colberberry Azelf to take that payback from Machamp, to get that momentum on the T-Tar wanting to, crunch it right off the bat. So, because a lot of standard stall teams at the time, oh, Hippo lead, well, I go to Scarf T-Tar and trap it right away. Well, now you don't. Now I preserve the sacrifice of Azelf, and I get the momentum on the T-Tar, I get some nice chip with U-turn. It's a game changer. Feel free to look up the Wi-Fi battle, Willis the Unbreakable versus Kevin Garrett. That's Garrett, not Garnett. This is not Uncut Gems. Yeah, so for an example of how that would work. But yeah, Cool Trainer Alex also inventing Colbur Azelf, and yeah, I must refer you to that Evolution of the Azelf video for further reading on the topic. Yeah, we're calling it reading. Yeah, and speaking of, then I won't rehash my recent Breloom video on the subject of Lead Breloom. As you see, it was 14th in usage in Jirachi's tournament last year, and in the recent SPL, it is in the top 10. So it is really, really climbing. But it is excellent. I mean, it's used as much as Gara and Suicune, who have been established for some time, used more than Hippo, Arrow, T-Tar, and Empoleon. Yeah, Breloom being a top 10 lead very much makes sense, and we're going to keep seeing it used, I'm sure. So that is basically it. I don't think there's been anything overlooked. I mean, another shout out to Gallade, which I really loved for a time. That whole anti-Machamp wave, I cannot tell you how crazy it was. It was either you use Machamp or you use leads that beat Machamp, and Starmie, on that subject, actually, Life Orb was a common because, it's good against, it was used in current gen, even before the Machamp explosion, because the idea is you Hydro, Arrow down to the Sash, and then you spin. Or you try to win the speed tie against Azelf. Or you have a good matchup against lead Heatran, of course. You have a good matchup against lead Metagross. If you're willing to sacrifice your Starmie, then you can prevent Roserade from doing, the nasty stuff it can do. But the thing, when Machamp became popular, then some great players like Legendary 07, aka Toby10, started using Spec Psychic Starmie. Because even with Life Orb Psychic, you are not guaranteed to KO lead Machamp. I remember Life Orb Psychic Azelf was actually quite popular in the summer of 2010 as an alternative choice band because you could also run Stealth Rock on it. Not that some people didn't also run Stealth Rock on choice band, but it was obviously much less reliable. And you could run. I love Trick on choice band too. But I also, that reminds me of Trick Scarf Azelf, also a great set now because it ruins Arrow. You want an Azelf that beats Arrow? There you go. Trick it, that Scarf, and you are in business. Wonderful set. Anyway, so, yeah, you need specs to consistently KO Psychic Machamp. And note how a lot of these maneuvers get messed up by the Machamp running Sash, by the way. And when it runs Sash, it runs max speed, and then the standard Lumberry Metagross no longer outspeeds it, which is a problem because Machamp can then get that second Dynamic Punch off and confuse it. So, yeah, if you run too much speed, you don't have that bulk, you're much worse at taking things like EQs. That reminds me, I have not mentioned Mamoswine, which was also a lead in the current gen. Because it had such a strong Earthquake, you would threaten Heatran through the Shuka Berry, which is huge. Nowadays, much more niche, but at least you mentioned it. Yeah, that was really cool, though. I mean, you just seeing it drop through Shuka, beautiful. Anyway, so what was I on? God, I totally blanked. Oh yeah, Spec Starmie. Yeah, so Spec Psychic Starmie, obviously you drop Machamp, and you trick Blissey on stall teams, and that also introduced the metagame to the power of Specs Hydro. Oh, well, Starmie loves switching moves. I mean, yeah, so does Infernape, but Choice Band is a great set on it, right? So Starmie, similar idea, and its Specs Hydro is just even resists. You don't need to Ice Beam them and take Life Orb and Sand Recoil for your trouble that might get pivoted around anyway. No, you just Hydro everything. And what's really big is that a lot of stall teams or semi-stall teams, they would take advantage of the fact that T-Tar always lives a Life Orb Starmie Hydro from full. And with Specs, it just drops hilariously. So, yeah, you can no longer do that safely. And you can safely trick Blissey, and even now, Spec Starmie is an amazing lead. It's not because it's trying to destroy Machamp leads at all costs, because those are not as popular now, but just because it's a great Pokemon. So, yeah, I mean, you face a Swampert lead, and it's like, all right, well, Swampert's getting 2 KO'd, whether it EQs or Stealth Rocks, and then have fun switching into the Specs Hydro. Even Latias takes a respectable chunk. So, yeah, and then you switch out, and then you're going to get the opportunity again later. So, yeah. Okay, I wanted to mention Raikou, which I realized I did not follow up on earlier. But Raikou is a very cool Pokemon because it's pretty much just a pure attacking lead. And there's a lot of variety to it. I mean, you don't have to run E-Speed now because another one of these major developments is that the lack of overemphasis on these dedicated leads means a lot less Sash. Because, again, the metagame is not, rocks at all costs, get that Sash off. It's more measured now. So with the lesser emphasis on Sash, then you are no longer as reliant on Extreme Speed. Also, because because priority to finish off faster leads is so popular, a lot of players have switched out against it for a long time. So a lot of the time, you wouldn't even wind up using that priority. You would just predict the switch. Machamp saying, oh, I'm going to pivot that into Bullet Punch. No, you're going to get slammed pivoting Jirachi into Bullet Punch because I actually used Dynamic Punch. Or whatever the example was, So, and then if you're creative in the team builder, you say, hey, you know what? If I'm not even going to use it, I don't even need it in the moveset. Now I get more coverage. So you can do cool things like that. So yeah, you can drop E-Speed on this Raikou, but you don't have to. And then it's got so many other options. HP Ice versus Grass. Aura Sphere is obviously great. Shadow Ball to really slam Azelf into E-Speed range because they're very bulky. And it's also great for Rotom leads. So yeah, Lumberry versus Life Orb versus Shuka, whatever you like. Great Pokemon. Great set. I really like pairing it with Scarf Zapdos personally. So, yeah. There's a lot of opportunity, and I would say now more than ever, is the chance for you to run whatever you feel like. I mean, people are running Rindoberry Swampert of all things now. You know, Lumberry Swampert, Custap Swampert. You know, the opportunities are really incredible. Empoleon sees use as a Specs lead now, a la Heatran. You know, not because it's necessarily trying to match up perfectly against something in particular, but just because it's a great Pokemon, it'll get those opportunities, and Specs Empoleon is a good Pokemon in general, so why not lead off with it? Yeah. There is the also specially defensive can be used as a lead if you want. You know, Uxie uses knockoff more now. That, I mean, again, there's so many options here. So that is basically all I wanted to say here. Trick Iron Ball Metagross is a lead. I mean, you're less likely to find your target, which is why it's not the most advisable. But hey, I mean, I've used it. You know, a lot of other people have used it too, because you don't trick the Iron Ball right off the bat. You know, and if you do, if you decide you want to, then I mean, go for it. But yeah, there's so many options now, and yeah, I like Trick Band Bronzong, actually. I think that's a great set, in or out of the lead slot. But yeah, Togekiss I should also mention as a good lead because, again, E-Speed. And generally, you know that idea I mentioned earlier, if it's worn down by passive damage, lead off with it, it becomes a lot harder to deal with, so it applies to Togekiss. It's a great attacking lead, powerful, hard to stop for a lot of teams. Yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, I hope this is useful, and I will see you in the next one.